That was so sweet, thank you. Freddie, that was such a nice introduction. I really want to thank you, and I'm very excited to be, wow, there's a lot of you out there. Well, I'm very honored to be here. It was in 2004 or so that I attended the first ATD conference in Washington, D.C., and stumbled around trying to figure out what was going on in the training industry, and that led to this career I've had studying all of this and trying to keep up with it for all of you. And so it's very exciting for me to come back. And in terms of the report that you mentioned in 2014, the 2017 Deloitte Human Capital Trends, which I just finished writing over the holidays, is coming out at the end of February. So stay tuned, there's lots more to come. So what I'm going to talk about, I think we have about an hour plus? Okay, hour plus time for questions, great. So keep your questions and let's definitely talk about some of these issues. What I'm going to go through is a fairly large amount of material on what we think is happening over the next year or two. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the next couple of years. This is all written down in a report called Predictions for 2017, which you can get online. It's available at no charge. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where this is going to go next, because we've been thinking about the next couple of years given the political changes and the economic changes going on around us. And then I'd love to get your questions. This is, you know, that's one of the best part for me. And I also want to thank you for inviting me here. It turns out the last time I was in Philadelphia was a long, long time ago. I came to meet with the folks at Merck. It was when we were a little 3-person company. And I remember I got completely lost and ended up in Delaware. So at least now I know where I am. So I hope to be able to come back more often. And I told you guys I'll be happy to do this every year if you'd like me to continue. So let me get started with a little bit of context. Relative to my role at Deloitte, I have this really wonderful job at Deloitte where we have this research business. I live in California. We study human capital trends around the world. We try to write about it as fast as we can. We try to put information available to our research members. And we also get to talk to some of the world's largest corporations through the Deloitte consulting business and all the things that Deloitte partners do. And I'd say the thing that's been the most amazing to me in the last 12 months, and I'm in my early 60s, I've been around since the 1970s. I entered the workforce before we had email, before we had voicemail, before we had any of this technology. Everybody is freaked out about technology. Every business we call on is basically saying we're being disrupted by digital this, digital that. Another company entered our space, our marketplace has changed, we have to build mobile apps, we have to get into services, on and on and on. There's a tremendous amount of disruption going on. And of course in the workforce we have changes of demographics, people living, by the way, people are going to live into their hundreds before long. I know some of you are from the healthcare industry, you certainly know that. So careers are getting longer, the life cycle of skills is getting shorter, and then we have this strange world of contingent work that's growing little by little every year. Every year we have in the United States about a 1% increase in the number of employees that work as contractors or gig workers as they're often called. And a study just came out from the National Bureau of Economic Research a couple weeks ago that looked through all of the jobs that were created under the Obama administration and came to the conclusion that all of the new jobs are actually jobs working in the contingent workforce. And you have to look at this study to understand how they did that. But so all of this is very, very disruptive to the things that we do in learning and HR and talent management. And so I see this, and we did a study, Deloitte does an annual study with MIT, and we survey 2,000 or 3,000 CEOs and ask them questions about what's going on in their businesses. Not only did 90% of them say their businesses are being disrupted, but 70% of them said we don't have the right talent or the right leadership to adapt fast enough to deal with the changes around us. You know, retailers are being disrupted by companies like Amazon. Obviously, the automobile industry is very concerned about what's going on in autonomous vehicles and companies like Uber. You can go from industry to industry and you can see this. So it's a very, very interesting time. The other topic that has become very, very loud and noisy in the market, and this was discussed at Davos, it's in every single article I seem to read, is the role of AI and robotics. So let me talk about that for a minute. And I'm a technologist, I'm an engineer, I studied engineering in the 70s, and I work for a couple software companies. This is really, in some ways, a huge change, in some ways, no change. We now have more or less off-the-shelf software. You can buy these tools, like Alexa, for $75 or so, that can understand your voice. We're all carrying them around in our phones. They can actually learn from the information that's processed. So the big difference in AI is that in traditional software, you program the computer to do something. In AI, you program the computer to learn something. And it actually changes its behavior over time based on information that's being collected. Now, in some ways, this is just another piece of technology, and so it's really not that different from everything that's happened, all along the last 30 years of technology. But in other ways, it is very disruptive, and it's freaking people out. And I would say some of the applications of this are quite amazing. This is one that I found astounding. John Deere now has tractors that they fly drones over the field to get a sense of the soil and the landscape. They plow exactly in the right place based on where the rocks and the soil is. They plant the seeds using sensors to determine where's the right spot in the soil. They water them and monitor the humidity using sensors. They then monitor them growing using the tractors to see when the seedlings are growing, and they can add fertilizer in exactly the right place based on the micro changes in the climate and the micro changes in the soil. And then when the fruit starts to grow, they can actually look at the fruit. The machines can look at the fruit and decide when to pick it. All done by software, all done by sensors, all done by computers. Somebody told me the other day that the average mobile phone has 7 sensors in it. It knows your temperature, it knows your GPS location, it's listening, it has a camera. I mean, these are things we're walking around with that cost less than $1,000 now, and that's why all this technology is changing the world of work. Now, the typical article you read on this is all these jobs are going to go away and we're going to have massive unemployment. And there's a lot of political talk about that too. That's a very naive look at what's going on. That is not what happens when technology enters the workforce. We've studied this, I've debated this with many, many people inside of Deloitte. What actually happens when technology enters the workforce is jobs change and new jobs are created. I'll give you 2 examples that will probably ring home for all of you. Number 1 is the automatic teller machine. This has been written about a lot lately. In the 1970s and 1980s, when I worked at IBM, there was a massive influx of online systems and online banking. And we put all these ATMs all over the country and all over the world, and people were really trying to shut down branch banks, and there was really an emphasis on shrinking the number of branch banks. But actually what happened was, because of electronic banking and because of automatic teller machines, the size of the banking industry grew and the cost per transaction went way down. So banks could offer many, many more things to many more people at a much lower cost, dramatically increasing the size of their markets, needing more human support behind that. And there are more tellers in and far more branches today than there were in the 1970s when the ATMs were started. So there are actually a lot of new jobs that were created. Now those tellers are not taking checks and putting them in envelopes and putting them into a little tube to send off to some transaction process. You're doing that in an ATM, you're not doing that in the branch, but you're talking to people, they're selling you things, they're explaining problems, they're helping you with issues. And so those jobs increased. Another example of that is the birth of the spreadsheet. When the spreadsheet was introduced in 1981 or 1982, people were concerned that the financial analyst community would go away. We wouldn't need financial analysts anymore because it would all be done by computers. And of course what happened is financial analysts became super financial analysts by learning how to do Excel macros and using the software to do new things, and now we're all financial analysts, right? So again, there are more financial analyst jobs than there were then, and we're all using these tools in new ways. So the technology creates augmented work, and so more and more people are starting to call this augmented, not artificial intelligence, and that's really what's happening. But what it causes is a rethinking of the jobs. And this study, which some folks in Deloitte UK did, which is very, very interesting, and I suggest you take a look at it if you're interested in this topic. We looked at all of the occupational OCI job descriptions for all the major jobs in the United States, mapped them against this big study that Oxford University did on what jobs are going to go away and be replicated or eliminated by technology. And there are some fairly obvious ones that are going to be automated. And you find that the jobs that are growing have a very clearly defined set of what we call essential skills, human skills. There are jobs in healthcare, there are jobs in sales, there are jobs in management, there are jobs that require communication, there are jobs that require listening, there are jobs that require synthetic thinking. One of the things I noticed, I'm very good friends with this company up in Boston by the name of Burning Glass, that is an amazing company that captures all of the job descriptions and all of the jobs. They're a data company in the US and Canada and the UK, and they analyze all this data. And the CEO and I were talking about it, and he said one of the things we've seen in all of the new jobs that are growing in salary is they are hybrid jobs. They are jobs that require technical skills and project management skills and management skills and design skills and critical thinking skills. So the human jobs that are going to be growing in number are still going to be there, they're just going to be a little bit different. Now, the other impact of technology, before I get into the trends, is this. In the 2014 trends that we were talking about a little bit earlier, we wrote a chapter called The Overwhelmed Employee. And that was the most fun one to write, because everybody could totally relate. You can see this statistics here, and this, lots of these statistics are coming out all the time. The part of this chart that makes me the saddest is that 40% of the US workforce doesn't believe they can have a vigorous career and a happy family life. That is not a good thing. But I think most of us are experiencing this every day, and my assessment of this is that we happen to be in an economic cycle where the technology is a little bit ahead of the human understanding of how to use it. Almost every major big company I talk to, and I know this is true inside of Deloitte, tells me, we have so many emails around here, nobody seems to be able to get any work done. It's really kind of cracks me up at Deloitte. When I first joined Deloitte, we weren't that big a company. We had like 75 people when we joined Deloitte. And we joined Deloitte, and it's this massive organization, and I go to the first meeting, and everybody gets to the meeting, and they immediately open up their laptop and start doing their email in the meeting. And I was like, what's going on here? We used to have a closed laptop policy at Bersin. That would never survive anymore. And I realized what happened is, I'm getting 300, 400 emails a day. And when I get up in the morning in California, I get up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and I go downstairs, there's 50 emails from the night before, because I stopped at 8 o'clock the night before. So, we don't know how to deal with all this yet. Now, there's some things going on, I think they're going to fix it. But this is a huge issue in organizations. I'll talk about what it means to us in HR and L&D. It's had a direct impact on what we do in L&D and what we do in HR in a huge, huge way. And companies that sell software, and our Workday's here and other software companies are here, have also been dramatically impacted by this and going to be impacted even more. And here's, I think, the most interesting part of it. Productivity has not gone up. Now, this is why, to some degree, this might be why Trump won the election. This might be why we have all these problems with nationalism in all the countries around the world. The US and global economy hasn't been growing it's not growing, it's just not growing at the rate we would like, and companies are struggling with this internally. Now, this data is challenged all the time. Economists keep wondering whether these numbers are correct, but they're pretty well established in most economic studies. And I think yet we have supercomputers basically in our pockets. So we're walking around with some supercomputers, and this is our productivity. So we are definitely wasting a lot of our time either looking at Twitter or Facebooking with our friends. Right? Am I wrong? It is true. I watch my own behavior just like everybody else's. These software companies, I live in Silicon Valley, I know lots of software people, they are very good at selling addictive drugs. And they know, and I'm not kidding, that is how they make money. They call it user engagement. And you get engaged and addicted to this stuff, and they sell ads, and they make a bunch of money, and that doesn't necessarily help us get more work done. So that's what's going on. And there will be some changes, and I'll show you some things I think are going to affect us in a big way. We are also taking less vacation. Here's another sort of sad statistic. This group is a really interesting little research group in Washington. I talked to them a couple months ago. We've shared a bunch of data back and forth. We are taking 4 days less vacation in I think it was 2015 than we did in 1998 or 1999. So all this technology is keeping us up at night, awake at night. You know, Arianna Huffington's running around the world telling everybody we need more sleep, which, you know, I can relate. So this is a real issue at work. I mean, it really is, and I think it impacts the predictions. So let's talk about the predictions. So the report has 11 of them. I don't know how we ended up with 11. I think I wrote 10, and then at the end somebody said, you left this one out. So I stuck it in there. But anyway, there's a lot of information in there, and let me walk you through them one at a time for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions. So organization design is first. Now, I didn't study org design, and my background, as I told you, is an engineer, and I learned about L&D and HR through all this research we've done. But the 2016 human capital trends, and you're going to see this again in the one this year, 92% of the companies, and this was 4,000 companies, this year it's 10,000 companies took the survey. 92% of these people, and about half these people were business people, said the way their organization is structured is not working. Our hierarchical functional structure is not producing the innovation and time to market and customer interactivity we need. We need a better structure. Only 14% of them said, we think we know how to do that. So that's essentially saying that virtually every company is struggling with the structure of the business itself, and what do we need to do to change it? Now, the real story behind this is quite complex, but the simple story is this. We all grew up, many of you are sort of my age, we grew up the companies that we work in today were modeled after the industrial organizations of the 1950s and the 1960s, which were basically built for scale. And those were times in the economy where if you had a product or a service and you could learn how to build it and people bought it and make money at it, you designed the organization to scale, and it was called industrial efficiency. The more we could scale faster and faster and faster to lower and lower and lower cost, the more money we would make. That's how the automobile industry was designed, the steel industry, almost every major industry that was here in the founding of the United States. Today we live in a world where industrial efficiency is disrupted by speed of learning. The companies that are taking away businesses from industrial organizations are learning faster than those industrial corporations. They are listening to their customers faster, they're applying technology faster, they're getting to market faster, they're innovating, they're using MVPs and other techniques to get things into the market quickly, and they're iterating so fast, by the time the industrial machine figures out what happened, it's a little bit too late. And plus, the industrial machine is not designed to iterate, it's not designed to innovate, it's not designed to come to market fast. And so what's happened is, this includes big companies, we're very close with Ford and GM and lots of big companies, are basically realizing we have to operate like a network of teams. It turns out, if you do the research on this, and I've done lots of research on this, human beings love to work in small groups. We have a human desire and a human nature of being part of a tribe, part of a small group. It's nice to be part of a big company too, we like that too, but we most relate to a small team. Research has been done by MIT that found that the average amount of time you will spend with people, you will spend 2 orders of magnitude more time with people that are within 50 feet of your desk than people that are further away. Because you can walk up to them, you can talk on the whiteboard, you can chat, you can get to know them. So that's number one. Number two, there was a study done that showed that the human brain can only handle about 100 relationships at a time. So even though you might have 1,000 friends on Facebook, You have, and this if you think about your career, and W.L. Gore has proven this. W.L. Gore has proven this by taking businesses that have more than 100 people and splitting them into businesses of 100 people or less. When there's about 100 people, you kind of know everybody, you know what's going on. When it starts to get above that, you kind of don't know where everybody is and what they're doing, and you don't have the same relationship with the rest of the organization. So we operate well in teams. So what happens is that even though the company looks like the picture on the left, and we have org charts and all sorts of old-fashioned artifacts of that, job levels, job titles, VPs, senior VPs, directors, senior directors, all these things, we actually work like the company on the right. And that's the research we've discovered, and that's what companies are trying to figure out. Now, the Human Capital Trends that's coming out in February has much, much more on this. We've been doing much more research on this. I'm actually working on a book now on all of this. This is the reality of the way work gets done, and we have to figure out how to optimize it. One of the things that's really important in teams, and books have been written on this. Julian Tett wrote an incredible book on teams. It's all about the way the New York City organization redesigned itself around teams, is including General McChrystal's story of the Iraq War, is the teams have to be coordinated with each other. You can't just let every team do whatever it wants, because they replicate and duplicate and conflict and sometimes compete with each other, and people don't know what each other are doing. So the thing that binds the teams together is culture, values, talent mobility, people moving from team to team, shared information, shared goals, a whole new set of practices that were never really designed in the old-fashioned ERP software that was developed for HR. So this team-centric network organization is really behind many, many of the things that are happening in HR and happening in L&D. I'd say one of the things that's been amazing for me working at Deloitte, I don't know how many of you really understand Deloitte. Deloitte has no org chart. You will never find it. It does not exist. There are hardly any job levels. There's only 5 levels in Deloitte. There's really only 5 job levels in Deloitte. And the only way you get anything done is through your personal relationships. And Deloitte spends an enormous amount of time having dinner together and going to partner meetings and going to conferences together. And when I first was part of Deloitte, I couldn't believe how much time we were spending in all this stuff. And then I realized this is how work gets done. People know each other. And when a problem comes up and a client says, I need somebody to help me with so-and-so, within 2 phone calls you can find the person who knows the answer to that question. And this is a company with 275,000 people. That's the kind of culture that organizations have to build. We had the head of talent for GM speak at Impact last year, and he said they did a study of all of the failed innovation projects at GM and compared them to all of the successful innovation projects at GM. And they tried to figure out what was it that was different. Was it the skills of the people? Was it the tenure of the people? Was it the nature of the teams? Was it the amount of money we gave them? What was it? And he said the one thing that was the most predictive of those high-performing teams is those teams had incredibly strong relationships all over GM. They knew how dealers worked, they knew how manufacturing worked, they knew how marketing worked, they knew how engineering worked, and they could leverage the organization through the way the organization works in their innovation. That is what this is all about. And that's why this is complicated. The second prediction is this issue of engagement, employee engagement. And I've written a lot about this, and this is a kind of a big topic. The first thing I would say is it's not a solved problem, and it's not going up. And I don't even like the word engagement anyway. We're going to try to change the language about it. But if you look at the data from Glassdoor, and that's the data that I've been able to look at about the last 10 years, the average engagement of all of the employees that rate their companies in Glassdoor has not gone up at all in 10 years. This bell curve looks almost identical every single year I look at it. Yet, there are always companies on the right. And so there is a key, and there's a whole set of keys to be unlocked, or locks to be unlocked by keys, I guess is the word, on how to do this. And this is a critical issue. One of the reasons this is a critical issue, and by the way, there's lots of evidence of this. If you look at the word culture, in 2015, culture was the most frequently searched word in the Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. Workforce culture is a trending topic in Google. People are trying to talk about it all the time. All of the vendors I talk with, every single one suddenly put culture in their company name or in their product name. Have you noticed how many products suddenly seem to be culture products? Like all of them. It's because of my first point. It is culture that binds us together, and people entering the workforce today and people at work who are stressed out by too many emails and everything else are looking for a culture they can relate to, a humanistic culture that will help them. And we've done a lot of work on this, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about what you can do about culture when I talk about employee experience in a couple of minutes. So that's number 2. Number 3 is feedback. When we were doing research on performance management, 2006, we started studying performance management. And at that point in time, companies were buying success factors, and they were doing top-down goals, and they were doing cascading goals. And I remember talking to one of the pioneers on this, and they said, you know, we're so excited that by the end of February, every employee in the company has all of their goals in the system, and they're all aligned to the CEO's goals. And they said, success. And I remember talking to 3 or 4 companies, and they said, we've succeeded. Our goal system is perfect because we were able to do that. I called that company back. That company had a couple of good years and some bad years. And I called them back, 4 or 5 years later, and they said, that goal thing we did, it was horrible. Because sure enough, around April or May, something happened. We needed to change what we were doing, and we had, 75,000 people had their goals locked in the system based on the decisions we had made in December of the year before and what the CEO had said, and we couldn't change the incentives, and it was really hard to deal with these changes that had taken place. Well, that's what basically has happened in this area of feedback. We've been through, as many of you know, a good 5 or 6 year of discussion about what performance management should look like, and sure enough, what we've discovered is something that's actually kind of simple and fundamental, that performance management is really management. It's really just good management. It's listening, it's talking, it's people talking to their peers and their leaders and their project leaders and giving them feedback in both directions. And so feedback became a buzzword over the last couple of years. Now, I don't have to tell you how great it is to have feedback. There's this study on the left is interesting if you read that link at the bottom. It was a study done by the National Institutes of Health, and I thought this was kind of a funny one, and it kind of brings the point home. They took a bunch of people and they put them into a sensory deprivation environment where they didn't get any feedback at all, and people started to go insane. And that's what it's like at work. If nobody tells you, I hope it's not like way in your offices. If nobody tells you whether you're doing a good job or not, you don't know. You get nervous. You get anxiety. Am I going to get a raise? Am I going to get fired? What's going on? So we thrive on that. It's human nature. So we've had a huge influx on how do we create a more feedback-rich environment. Now, one of the things that I noticed about this when I started writing about this 2 or 3 years ago was we have this sort of dysfunctional thing we do in companies. We say to the employees, once a year, we want you to tell us how we're doing. So we're going to send you an engagement survey once a year. 65 to 70% of companies do it once a year or less than once a year. Today, by the way. And once a year, we're going to tell you how you're doing on your performance appraisal. That is the most absurd idea. If you really think about it, why don't we do this all the time? I mean, that's what happens in our personal relationships, hopefully. So that's what's been going on, is the marketplace of engagement and tools and feedback and performance management is reinventing itself around the concepts of continuous feedback. It's very, very analogous to what's happened in customer side of our businesses. We don't survey our customers once a year. Hopefully we survey them every time they have a transaction with us or on a regular basis, so we get continuous feedback about what's working and what's not working with all the products and services we have in our companies. That's how the Net Promoter idea was founded, and all sorts of tools and techniques have been developed for that. We're going through the exact same evolution in HR. And incidentally, many technology companies have picked up on this. I get calls from startups all the time, and there are more than 120 startup companies building pulse survey tools, real-time performance management tools. I won't get into all of them. We can talk about them during the Q&A if you'd like. But they're all coming up with incredibly interesting ideas on how to open up this channel of feedback and make it easy. It's not as easy as it looks. Most of the companies I talk to that are doing this say, you know what? There's a muscle that needs to be developed, a feedback muscle. The first year that we ask people to give feedback, it's all positive. Because everybody's afraid of saying things that might get somebody upset or might reflect on them in a negative way, so they don't really get any negative feedback. And then they realize, okay, this is a safe environment, we're really going to make it constructive, and it starts to get more positive and more constructive and more developmental over time. The folks at GE actually, who have been working on this for 3 or 4 years, told me we've gotten rid of the word feedback because even the word feedback is intimidating because, feedback is, like, oh, please don't give me any feedback. It usually means I've got some bad news for you. So they call it insights. They say, look, when you have these conversations, call them insights. They're not feedback. So we're learning about this. We're about 2 or 3 years into this. But I think this is going to revolutionize almost everything we do in HR and talent, is getting data, sharing information with each other, and I'll talk more about that during the Q&A. Now, example of that, Deloitte. Legacy Deloitte is audit and tax. This is a company that's still run largely by auditors. Top down, hit your numbers, or else we don't need you around here kind of place. But it's a human company, and engagement and education and training and culture and relationships is really what makes the company work. Had a very traditional performance management process, once a year meetings, talent reviews done in a black box where nobody knew what happened, and then you'd get your number, and that was it. Lots of young people at Deloitte, were putting up with it, but a lot of people weren't putting up with it. Did a lot of studies on this, and I really credit Deloitte for doing a really incredible job of really listening here. Reinvented the whole thing. And Deloitte now has what is called a RPM. It's a continuous performance management process, and every quarter and by the way, the other challenge of Deloitte is the consultants change teams all the time. So they'll work on one client for 3 or 4 months, and they'll work on another one, so they don't even have the same manager all the time. They have a career advisor who sticks with them, but their project managers will change, which is the way most organizations work anyway. And so Deloitte basically developed a tool. We couldn't find software. We spent a year looking for a tool that would do this. It doesn't exist yet. It's getting there. And Deloitte built a tool that surveys employees every quarter, asks these 8 very, very carefully worded questions to get a sense of what's going on from the employee's perspective, and what does this mean relative to the team, what does it mean relative to the organization, and what does it mean relative to the team leader. Believe it or not, the answers to these 8 questions are 100% predictive of the financial performance of that team. The teams that score high on these 8 questions are more effective, more efficient, they're making more money, they have higher engagement, they have lower turnover. This is a performance measure. So the feedback system isn't just a nice touchy-feely thing to do for OD people who are in the engagement group. It's actually part of performance management. That's where you get the information on what's working and what's not working, and that's how line leaders can continuously improve themselves. I'll tell you, a little anecdote on that one. I was on a plane somewhere on the way home from someplace, and I'm sitting next to a guy. I don't know where I am half the time. I kind of know the time zone. And he happened to work at Facebook, and we were chatting, and he said, yeah, I run the engineering for this particular group at Facebook. And I said, well, I'm sort of an HR guy, and he said, let me show you something that's going on. And he pops open his screen, and he shows me this survey that is sent out by Facebook to all the employees. All of the employees on his team get a feedback survey every quarter, and he has to look at the numbers, and it's got 15 or 16 questions, and he gets evaluated versus his team versus the rest of Facebook every quarter. So they built this themselves. And he's looking at this and he's like, I don't know what to do about this. And so we spent, a good hour or so on the plane just chatting about what this all meant. That's what we all need to do. I mean, we all need to have those kinds of processes. And unfortunately, the tools that we're buying today don't have that yet. I mean, you know, I was talking with some folks from Workday a little bit earlier. Workday has a little bit of this. You know, the rest of the products out in the market are working on it, but it's coming. And I would suggest that you have to think about it as a complete architecture. There's all different ways and times that you can get feedback. And so this is a picture I put together, and we've helped some companies think through of the different places where you will get feedback. And by the way, you can't do this unless you can do analytics. So another topic we'll talk about in a minute is what's going on in analytics. If you don't have somebody who can do a reasonably good job of analytics, what are you going to do with all this data? How are you going to make sense of it? How are you going to analyze it? That's why analytics is so business critical in HR today. Now, it turns out in analytics, things have actually moved. I wrote a book on training measurement in 2005 or so, a long time ago. And I used to go to these training analytics conferences, and there would be like 50 people in the room, and they were, you know, sort of the geeky learning measurement types. You know who these people are. And they're writing ROI stories, and they're talking to Brinkerhoff, you know, and you know, all that. And they're always frustrated that, you know, nobody's paying attention to what we're doing, and we're not measuring enough things, and we don't have enough systems for this. Well, that's actually changed a lot. We have, you know, very sophisticated companies investing very heavily in analytics now. Almost every major corporation I go to wants help building a stronger analytics team. We just wrote an incredible case study in the research library about Chevron, how Chevron built a global, essentially confederation of talent analytics people to use all this data. This is a critical part of the whole equation for the next couple of years as we figure out what to do with all this feedback. Okay, so that's that one. Where are we here? Number 4. Is this good? We on track here? You guys enjoying this? All right. If I say anything that's controversial, just raise your hand and I'll, you know, glad to talk to you. Performance management. You're gonna read a lot about this in the Human Capital Trends 17. I've been living this journey with you as long as anybody and studied it very carefully, and it has really been an interesting journey. There were the original sort of big articles about performance management was do away with ratings, right? We don't need ratings. Well, that was a red herring. That actually isn't the topic. That has a little bit to do with it, but not really. The real issue is building a continuous performance management process that goes on at a regular basis in a transparent way. And so I tried to put into one slide all the things that are going on in that area. Lots of companies have done experiments on this, and they're all working. I haven't talked to a single company that has tried a performance management experiment that said it was a complete failure. None. All of the experiments have worked. And so the best practices for this are now being written. We've written a lot of them. I expect there will be books on this. The new software that's being developed is starting to industrialize this more and more and more. It's interesting when you look at the tools and the products in the market that are focused in this area, they're coming at it from different directions. The reason is there are many different parts to this. There are check-ins. There are goal management tools to create more transparency and agility in goals. There's tools to give you mobile apps so I don't have to log on to some website. We did here's another funny piece of data that I thought was just astounding. In the 2014 Human Capital Trends, 86% of the companies, when asked about their performance management software, said it is not worth the time we're putting into it. Not only is it not helping performance, but the software itself is wasting our time. So these tools are very mobile. We go through regular consistent evaluations. People want to have online learning. They want to have tips and tools and videos and coaching guides available online as part of their evaluation. We want to do individual assessment, peer assessment. All these things I was talking about for the last 15 minutes need to be built into the performance management process. Unfortunately, the software industry and the vendors are all in different spaces. So those little red circles are little circles representing tools that are actually in different parts of the market. And what I've found going out there talking to many, many companies is that if you want to build this type of program and you want to buy a piece of software to do it, unfortunately you're going to have to do a little bit of it yourself. There are some really exciting vendors entering this market, but the big players aren't there yet, and nobody has become sort of the gorilla, the next success factors in this space. So it's a very interesting space. I will tell you, though, it is working. David Rock and I have talked about this a lot. He did a study, interviewed 27 companies. We've interviewed, probably 50. The companies that implement continuous performance management always tell us they're getting better employee engagement, they're getting improved development planning, they're having more conversations. Ashley Goodall, who runs this group at Cisco that's been doing this, told me, he said, one of the things that's been the most interesting about their continuous performance management process they've done there is that managers don't have to have weekly one-on-ones with their people anymore. I always thought weekly one-on-ones were kind of awkward. Once a week I have to have an hour conversation with each employee, when actually I just want to have a 5-minute conversation right now on one topic and then move on, and then maybe tomorrow I'll have another 5-minute conversation. He said, we're almost done away with that now because we're getting continuous conversations back and forth between people and their managers and their team leaders using these new tools that allow us to do that. So these are really, to me, transformational changes that are going to fix that productivity problem, that I talked about earlier. So that's what's going on in performance management. Number 5, wellness and well-being. I don't think anyone, I know we have folks here from CHOP and healthcare providers and pharmaceutical companies. I don't think anyone would argue that well-being is an important part of business. I was at Nestle a couple months ago, and Nestle is a fascinating company. They're one of the largest companies in the world. They have more than 400,000 employees. You don't really know who they are because most of their products are sold through their own independent brands. They're going the transformation at Nestle to turn Nestle into I don't remember the tagline, and you can look it on their website, basically a wellness company. They say, we're not here to sell food. We're here to make people healthy. That's our job. So they understand that is really a huge trend all around the world. Now, what does that mean relative to HR? Well, I had the opportunity to learn about this in the last year or so. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm learning. And I kind of think we're going through a transition. The wellness topic in most companies was originally really owned by the Comp and Ben department, and it was really a tool to reduce insurance costs. So we would have a employee wellness or EAP or benefits program that would give employees all sorts of tools to improve their health and fitness with the goal of reducing our insurance costs. And yes, it was also for employee engagement, it was also to attract people, but it was usually in that sort of thinking. And then these organizations began to realize that the topic was more than just health. It was really fitness and exercise and weight and blood pressure and all those other things that relate to that. So they became more extensive, and we got more extensive, kind of programs. Then, we went into this world a couple years ago. Do you remember the Time magazine that had the picture of the yoga woman on the front? I don't know if you guys read this stuff like I do, but there was a Time magazine that came out about 2 years ago. It was the year of the 2014 Human Capital Trends, and it showed a woman sitting there, and doing yoga. And it was the beginning of this concept of mindfulness. Remember the mindfulness thing? And everybody's doing courses on mindfulness, and Google's most famous course was mindfulness. We got wrapped around this idea that we're not going to be really productive or useful at work if we're constantly frenetic and busy and we don't have a chance to think. So companies started to create nap rooms and yoga rooms. My daughter works for a startup in San Francisco that has yoga classes in the office. Many big companies I talk to now have places to be quiet, places to be still, programs to help you stay fit, wellness, all that stuff. So this has become really big. And now I think we're reaching a phase where we're starting to realize that this is really all about the essence of human performance. And that the wellness program is not a program to reduce insurance costs. It is part of human performance. And when you think about the overwhelmed employee topic I showed you earlier, we have to think about what it's like to be an employee and what is really going on in that person's life and what we can do to make it better. And if we can do that in HR and L&D, we're going to be heroes. We're going to improve performance, we're going to improve engagement, we're going to improve retention, everything's going to get better. We have this interesting thing, and Deloitte is talking about this. I'll tell you another example of Deloitte. So, the typical Deloitte consultant, young consultant, gets on a plane Sunday night, goes several time zones away, lives in a hotel, works at a client, and comes home Thursday night, spends Friday in the office, recovers on Saturday, and goes back on the flight on Sunday. It's a pretty grueling lifestyle. It's fun and exciting, and a lot of young people like it, but people get burned out. Okay, so here's the story. So there was a whole bunch of work and meetings that went on about this, and what came out of it was flexibility, number one. People want flexibility. They want to decide when they want to get on a plane and when they want to work from home. That's a huge finding. But the second finding was people don't want to be told how to work. They don't want to be told we're going to turn off emails on Friday. They don't want to be told, don't have meetings on, Monday mornings. But they want to do it themselves. People want to be given the tools and the information to improve their health and wellness in the way that's best for them. So what Deloitte did is built an app called Vitality that goes through and it looks through the ERP system and it determines how many miles you flew last week, how many hours you worked, how many time zones you went through, some other information that's available in the system, and it gives you fixed, great, thank you. Great. And it gives you nudges. You know what the word nudges are? It's the behavioral economic thing. It gives you hints. It says, you were really up there in your travel over the last 3 weeks. You're like number one for time zones of all the people at your level. Like maybe you might want to think about toning it down. And actually people have really liked it. This is in a prototype. Those are the kinds of things we need. And there are now software vendors building apps, some very creative companies, to teach people how to change their habits using information to make them smarter about their lifestyle and help them better manage their day so that they can be healthier and more focused and improve their own personal performance. And I think that's going to be a big, big part of HR. I don't think that's going to be in comp and ben. That's got to be part of your core strategy. There's all sorts of ideas on how to do this, and more and more of that will come. Which leads me to the next topic. Number 6, employee experience. I become very sensitive to buzzwords because I do a lot of reading, and employee engagement is tiptoeing out the door and it's going somewhere else, and employee experience is tiptoeing in the door to take its place. And we are really doing a lot of work on this. We're now reaching a point where I think most of you probably have an employee experience person, program, or at least you're talking about it. And what's happened is we really have to look at the holistic day, life, year of an employee in a complete way using the ideas of design thinking. First of all, I don't have to convince you this is important. People tell us that the culture and the environment at work is 2 or 3 times more important than the salary on whether they would stay or leave or whether they would recommend your company as a place to work. Okay, that's well known. We also know from our research that culture and engagement are interlocked things. The original research was done on engagement, which goes way, way, way back to Frederick Taylor and the early days of the steel industry, was about certain artifacts of work. We also know that there are certain artifacts of the culture, and they all fit together. We built this model called Simply Irresistible that is a framework for what we believe are the 20 things that make up an actual employee's experience at work. We went through, the reason we built this, the reason I ended up building this is I went through all the research we had done for the last 15 years or so and talked to many, many companies about it, and I realized this is much more complicated than people think. Sometimes the employee experience is, there's a safety hazard here, and I don't like working here because people could get hurt. Sometimes it's, I never see my manager. Sometimes it's, I'm on the plane too much. Sometimes it's, I don't know what my goals are. Sometimes I don't really know how to do my job and I don't have anybody to help me. All these things come together to create the integrated employee experience. And if you think about employee experience, what we found is that the only way you can really deal with it is to take a design thinking approach to what's going on in your workforce. Now, let me give you 1 or 2 examples of that. You can't boil the ocean and fix the employee experience for every employee at every level in your company at the same time. You're going to find that the new employees the first year in the job have one set of issues. The new managers have another set of issues. The senior managers have another set of issues. The salespeople have another set of issues. So the key to doing work in employee experience is segmenting your workforce, deciding where to focus, and then building a team that can do design thinking around that group. I had a good call, and we put this in the Human Capital Trends, a good call with a Canadian bank on this topic last month. And they said, you know, we did a big soul searching on this, and we realized that if there was one thing we could fix that would have the most impact in our organization, it's the productivity and turnover of the first year new branch employees in our bank. Because it's the first year that they struggle and often fail that really hurts us in the branches. So they did a design thinking exercise of what is it like to be a first year employee in this bank. And then they stepped back and said, what is it like to be a candidate who evaluates whether I want to work in the bank, and how would the candidate experience leverage perhaps the first year experience. And by the way, I had this exact same conversation with a telecommunications company who did exactly the same thing for their salespeople who work in the sales offices of their phone stores. And they found, you know what, it's complicated. There's the first day, there's the first week, there's the first month, there's the first quarter, there's the second quarter, there's the third quarter, and there's different things that happen. And we call these moments that matter. And so if you go through a design thinking exercise and you take a selected part of your workforce and you think about that way, you will come up with some incredibly interesting findings about how to apply HR and L&D to solve their problems. You don't have to be a bank or a tech company to do this. Anybody can do it. This company is one of the most highly engaged companies in the world. It's Quicken Loans in Detroit. They are a mortgage banker. They're in an industry that's a relatively old-fashioned, traditional, transactional industry, but they have the biggest, most incredible passion around what they do. The woman who runs HR for them spoke at our conference a year or two ago. They wrote a book on what they call the isms of Quicken Loans. It's all of the behaviors, and it's a bunch of cartoons. It's a 50 or 60 page book of cartoons and stories about how people react and behave and help customers in different ways, all with little messages on how we do things around here, kind of stuff. So you can do this regardless of what industry you're in or regardless of what size company you're in, and this is going to be a huge trend. I think you're going to see more and more stories about how companies have reinvented the employee experience in different segments of their workforce using design thinking. Okay, so that's that one. Number 7, technology. I know we have Workday here. We probably have a bunch of folks from other vendors. HR technology is a fascinating, enormous industry. It's a $14 or $15 billion industry. The venture capital guys are all over it right now. They are funding startups as fast as I can keep up with them. Lots of reasons for that. We are going through a glacial, or really, what's the word? We're going through a fundamental shift. About 6 or 7 years ago, we went through a shift from licensed software to the cloud, right? We had cloud talent management, cloud recruiting systems. Now we have cloud ERP systems. Everybody's replacing their core HR systems with the cloud. We're going through another massive shift from the cloud to digital. Digital is mobile, it's apps, it's employee-facing, it's consumerized, it's not the cloud. The cloud is great. The cloud does some great stuff. But I've talked to lots of companies that bought cloud HR stuff, and they've spent tens of millions of dollars, and a lot of that money went to companies like Deloitte to help them implement that stuff. And they said, you know what, we got this all running, and employees' lives haven't changed a bit. Our HR department's a little bit happier. We have better systems. We can get more data. We're a little bit more trusting of what's going on because we have integrated applications and integrated processes. But the employees are still not using the software enough. They're not getting that much utility out of it. It's not really changing their daily lives. So there's another major trend coming. I would say this has been a very tumultuous and interesting time in tech. By the way, there is another report that I wrote in November of last year on technology that's similar in size to the predictions report. So if you're looking for more depth on this, it's called Technology Disruptions 2017, and it came out in November of last year. So those two things kind of go together. There has been a lot of rip and replace going on. I would say my guess is 60% of large companies have shifted to the cloud over the last 5 years. The other 30 or 40% are probably going to do it much more slowly, because there's a lot of companies that frankly just don't want to spend 20 or 30 million dollars on a new ERP system, and they're willing to limp along and do it in time. So that'll happen, but it'll happen slowly. But you see from the companies that are doing this that they're shifting their focus from core ERP to more sort of talent applications again, learning and performance management being the big ones. In fact, the fastest growing HR technology segment now is learning again, which is where we started in 2004, whatever that was, 13 years ago. So people are starting to realize, look, we got this cloud ERP thing here, now we need to do something about the employee experience, so let's fix performance management and learning. And they're finding, you know what, there isn't enough stuff. Some of those tools aren't ready. We're also seeing data, a lot of focus on career management. You're going to see next month in the human capital trends, the number 2 trend this year, is career. How do we create an agile, mobile, developmental career environment of our company? And then you also see companies telling us that, look, we love this software, but the employees are telling us, it's a little bit better than what we had before, but it's not that much better. It's still ERP software after it's all said and done. So this is changing. And what's happening is we're really getting into a world of a new breed of apps that are focused on trying to deal with the issues I mentioned earlier. Trying to deal with the issues of continuous feedback, agile goal management, teams, empowering teams, and improving productivity. And that's where all this money's going to startups. These are startups that are building tools that look more like Twitter, more like Facebook, more like Instagram, and less like ERP. And they're tools that are kind of fun to use, and they're tools that are engaging, but they're useful. They're not engaging just because they're engaging because they're useful. So some of the hottest new companies that are entering the HR space are founded by people that worked in gaming. The 2 best tools that I have seen for performance management are run by CEOs that worked in game software companies. I won't mention the company names, and their tools, when you use them, they're just, like really, really fun and easy to use. I was with a large company doing a big bake-off of small vendor tools for performance management in late last year. And they said, we looked at all the tools and we went through all the functionality, and we realized it has nothing to do with functionality. What we did is we got a group of employees to use the tools for a month and tell us if they liked them or not. If they liked them, we're going to look at it. If they don't like them, we're not going to look at it. It's that simple. If employees don't use this stuff, it's not doing us any good. That's a big shift from the entire software industry in HR that I've worked in the last 15 years. So that's what's changing. Many, many examples of this. A lot of companies have built their own stuff because they couldn't find it on the web yet or on the market yet. This is GE's prototype of their performance management tool. They rolled this out about a year ago. They are looking for a vendor tool now. I'm not sure if they're going to find what they want, but they're looking around. This is the new world of HR technology. So just at the time you finally figured out how to get your systems into the cloud, now the digital stuff comes along and we got to go look for it again. So that's just the way it goes. We just got to stick with this. And I do think what's going to happen, and this is already happening, is we're going to see another convergence take place where you're not going to have one tool for goals and one tool for performance and one tool for learning and one tool for engagement, another tool for wellness. All of those things are coming together, and all these vendors are starting to copy each other. And I'll bet 2 or 3 years from now, it's probably a year or two away, we're going to see another wave of consolidation as these things come together. So that's a little bit about what's going on in technology. One of the other things that's going on, of course, is AI. The HR technology vendors are just as smart as everybody else. They are applying AI too. And so let me give you a couple examples of some really interesting things happening in AI. These guys, HireVue, very successful company that started out in video interviewing. Video interviewing is almost a commodity feature of HR software now. It's very powerful, very useful, allows you to screen candidates in a new way. They rolled out about a year ago AI software that can look at a video, determine the gender and race of the candidate, not so much for screening, but to make sure that the managers are not biased. Because if a manager is not necessarily letting women through the pipeline or not letting African Americans through the pipeline or whoever it may be, this software would pick that up and generate reports on manager behavior for diversity and actually can identify and give people hints on whether a candidate might be lying based on their behavior in the video interview. Now, I'm not saying this is validated stuff and you should make hiring decisions based on this, but there was an article that came out in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal about Goldman Sachs using this exact software to dramatically improve their screening process for candidates. And this is the kind of software that is not rocket science anymore. One of the companies I talked to, an AI software company that I talked to last week actually, now has software that can read a document, whether it be an online book, a web page, or a document that you created, interpret the document, identify the learning patterns in that document, and generate an assessment that you could give somebody that would teach them how to actually assess somebody against that document. I couldn't believe this. They actually developed this for the textbook industry, and they couldn't figure out how to monetize it, so they're bringing it to corporate learning. So the guy and I, we looked at it, and I said, let's just find something on the web. So we went to Wikipedia, and we found the mosquitoes on Wikipedia. And we did, you know, it's like, I don't know, 10 pages of stuff. He points the software at the thing, it reads it, and within about 5 seconds, it gives me a 5-question quiz on mosquitoes based on the information in Wikipedia, and it immediately linked me to 5 other websites to learn more about mosquitoes. I mean, imagine what that kind of software would do if you pointed it at your internal training systems and training technology and training data. That's the kind of stuff that's coming to HR. This is coming over the next year. A lot of these things are very interesting. The other one that I think is going to be very big is AI-based employee support. Now, a lot of these tools are now being applied to candidates so that candidates can interact with a software tool to learn more about the company. But the example that I think is the most interesting is one that IBM did. IBM, of course, has Watson, and they're playing around with all sorts of interesting things. They developed an application called CHIP. It's called the Computer Human Interface Program, kind of not a very nice name, but what it was used for is they went through, you know, they have 400,000 people or so at IBM, lots of new employees, lots of people changing jobs, many people asking the HR department for help on many things. They took the 200 most frequently asked questions by employees. They put them into this database. I don't know whether they used Watson or some other tool. They probably used some form of Watson. They they put a natural language on top of it because natural language tools are pretty much off the shelf. And they rolled it out as an employee Q&A tool. And they started to look at the kinds of questions people were asking and the kinds of answers they were getting. And every time it gave you an answer, you could rate whether the answer was good or bad and how good or bad it was. And the tool got smarter and smarter and smarter. And as they were monitoring the tool, they could see how, you know, there were a few questions they were missing. There were some questions that were more important. And then they realized, oh, here's an interesting thing that's happening. We can actually connect the tool to our HRMS, and now the tool can answer in more intelligent ways. So for example, if I go to CHIP and I say, you know, I'm a new employee, how do I, you know, get my badge? Or how do I fill out my expense account? It will say, you know, here's the documentation to read, and by the way, three doors down from you is another new employee named so-and-so who started 3 weeks ago, who just asked the same question. You might want to talk to him. I mean, think about those kinds of applications that software could do. I'm looking for a new job. I would like to know what the next job could be for me. Oh, talk to so-and-so. He or she just went through this exact transition and moved from this job to this job, and they've you know, recently, you know, been successful in their new role. These are things that can be done by software now that we have natural language interfaces on top of them to make them so much easier to use. So I think there's going to be some very exciting things there. And by the way, the other thing that's coming, in addition to all that, is I do think we are in the beginning of a huge wave of replacing or supplementing email with better collaborative tools in business. Slack, which is in my neighborhood, Facebook, this product called Workplace by Facebook, we're playing around with it in Deloitte. Microsoft's new product called, I think it's going to be called Skype for Teams or Microsoft Teams. I wouldn't be surprised if Cisco gets into this. Google's got a product for this. Now have tools that are changing the way we work. If you look at, how many of you have people in your employ that use Slack, by the way? Do you know anything? Anybody? Okay, it may not be as big as here as is in the software industry. It's sort of an online messaging system, but people who use it, it's for teams. It's for teams to interact. Oh, here's an example on that one. Anyone hear of the company Trello? Did you see how much they got bought for? $425 million for that company. They were bought by Atlassian. I don't think the company had more than maybe $15 or $20 million in revenue. This is really hot. Software companies are beginning to pick up this trend away from the traditional store and forward email mechanism of communication towards a more collaborative tool set. And so I wouldn't be surprised if most of you within the next year or two, your IT departments are going to start evaluating these tools for enterprise deployment. And guess what? All the new HR tools that are being built by these startups, they're plugins to these. They're not destinations, they're modules within the work environment of these new tools. So that's what's going on in technology. That's going to change a lot. A couple more topics, then we'll open up for questions. Number 8, leadership. How many of you are in the leadership business, or you have leadership development under you, or you? Yeah, I mean, we all do this. It's a very fragmented, sort of slightly broken market. The reason I say it's broken, I don't mean that there's anything wrong with what anybody's doing, but it always comes up as the number 1 or number 2 challenge companies have. Every single survey we've ever done since I started doing this, this comes up. And the reason is, I think it's a bifurcated market where some companies invest very heavily in leadership and they take it very seriously and they have strong cultures around it and lots of activities and models and artifacts around leadership, and a lot of companies don't. And what you see from this data is, you know, a good 60 or 70% of the, this is brand new, this is from last year, late last year, 60 or 70% of the companies we surveyed are at what we call level 1, level 2 in leadership, yet the rest are at level 3 and level 4. And what you find is the companies at level 3 and level 4 are spending 3 to 4 times as much money on leadership development and leadership assessment than the companies at levels 1 and 2. And I think this is just the way the world works. I think it's always going to be like this. The reason is, my assessment of this is that when you're a high-performing company and everything's going well, you don't think about leadership at all. You assume that everybody's great at their job and our leaders are fantastic. And then when the wheels fall off and you have a problem, all of a sudden the leadership is a mess. What's wrong with our leadership? Why can't we fix this? And so what happens in leadership is we find companies go through these cycles of, yeah, everything's fine, we're not really going to invest in the leadership program this year because it's kind of like everybody's happy and the company's doing well. And then the company does poorly, like, wow, we really need to reinvest in the leadership program again. So it goes through cycles. Now, one of the things we have seen in leadership, I'll just make a couple points on this. We're not developing leaders early enough. I was with the CHRO of a very large consumer packaged goods company late last year, and she said, our leadership model is very simple. It's hazing. You go through 20 years of hazing, and if you survive, you become a senior leader. And I relate to that. I saw that, parts of my career. Obviously, that's an artifact of the old industrial way of thinking about business. Mark Zuckerberg is, I think, 31. He is running the most successful, highest market cap internet company in the world. Would he have become a senior leader in your company? Probably not. Most of you would have said he's not ready for that, right? He needs to have 5 more assignments, rotating back and forth over the next 10 years before he gets that job. We have to promote people much, much faster. We have to give them jobs before they are ready. We have to let them learn on the job. I've seen this, it's interesting in Deloitte. I actually really admire Deloitte for this. The people that have taken senior roles in the human capital business in Deloitte, many of them are much, much younger than I would have expected. And they don't necessarily know what to do, but there's a huge amount of scaffolding to help them learn how to do their jobs. Because Deloitte knows that if we build these people early in their career, they will become incredibly powerful very quickly over time, and they'll bring innovative, fresh ideas and a fresh understanding of the workforce and the clients and the whole customer environment to market. So that's a big one. The second thing is the idea of digital leadership. I won't spend a lot of time on this. That's a very deep topic. But what we are finding is that the great leaders of today actually behave differently and have different skills and different traits than the great leaders of a decade ago. We're calling it digital leadership, and we have a big project and a big body of IP called Digital DNA that actually will help you assess yourself against these digital traits that these high-performing companies and really fast-moving companies are doing. One of the organizations that's really jumped into this in a big way is GE. I don't know if we have anybody from GE here, but I talked with Janice Semper yesterday or Friday. They have done an amazing job of reinventing management at GE. And there's a wonderful quote from Jeff Immelt in a magazine just a couple months ago, and he said something like, you know, this new digital thing is way bigger than Six Sigma. And he said, if I could turn the clock back, I kind of wish we hadn't done Six Sigma, because this is even bigger than that. You know, and this is a company that thinks about leadership very systemically and at a very, very strategic level. So that's a big topic you can read about in leadership. This one really boggles my mind. I don't know what to make of this, but I wanted to just throw it out there. Korn Ferry did this study, and you know, Korn Ferry is a little bit of a vested interest because they want to sell leadership development, but I think the data is probably accurate. They did this study just a month or so ago, and they found that, you know, close to 2/3 of CEOs believe that technology is more important than human capital. I mean, I think that's a very naive thing to think about. Obviously, technology is critical. You can't run any business without great technology. But my experience with technology is that if you don't have the right people building and iterating and continuously improving the technology doesn't invent itself. It's still about the people. So even if somebody says to you, well, you know, we got to focus on building new systems, and it's still about leadership. And so but we have some work to do, you know, convincing CEOs sometimes. And that's really where I think we can sometimes help. Final topic on the leadership is number 9, inclusion and diversity. I actually sort of got into a firestorm on this one. We found in the 2017 Human Capital Trends, one of the very fast-growing trends is increased focus on diversity and inclusion at the CEO level. So we started writing this chapter, wrote a draft, did a bunch of research, circulated around inside of Deloitte. Oh man, there was a lot of debate about this one. The folks in, you know, Australia have, you know, an opinion on that. Our group in, you know, California has an opinion on that. This group, everybody's got a different idea about what this is all about. That's why this is such a contentious and difficult problem. I won't get into it in great detail, but I will say that I think given the political environment, the pressure your employees are feeling from some of the things coming out of the administration, the nationalistic move in different countries, this is a very, very sensitive topic that people are worried about. Employees are worried about it. They're worried about it from their own standpoint. And we have to bend over backwards to take this on seriously as business people. We know that it's important. This is the research we did in talent management last year. Stacia Gar, who leads this, did a 2 or 3 year program studying talent management in 700 companies, including all over Asia, looked at 100 different practices in HR, found that the most differentiating practices that were most predictive of business outcomes was inclusion. Practices that created a sense of openness, that people could be themselves, that people could speak up, that there were clear processes in place to make sure that managers were not biased or implementing biased processes in recruiting and promotion and development and all of those things that we do in HR. Those were the most differentiating practices. So this is a very important topic. I won't spend a lot of time on it because we're a little bit past time. but there's been a lot written on it. I'll tell you the one thing that I've learned about inclusion, having done this research this last year, is that it is much bigger than training. Training is a part of it. Awareness and education is a part of it. But the new solutions that are going to fix and deal with this are going to have to be based on senior leadership taking ownership for the topic, doing things about it, holding people accountable, measuring diversity measures, making the data transparent, and putting in place business practices that actually, in some ways, prevent discrimination from happening. We had Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, speak at our partner conference last year. And he told the story of gender pay gap at Salesforce. And he said, and he's an incredible guy, and he said, somebody came to my attention, somebody from HR, and said, we did an analysis and we looked at gender pay disparity at the same level, at the same job across Salesforce, and we found an 11% disparity. Women are making 11% less than men in Salesforce, which is a relatively young company, at similar jobs at similar levels. He said, I was so upset, he said, that day I gave all those people an 11% raise. I immediately went back to HR and I said, if that data is correct, we're fixing it today. And the next day it was fixed. That's the kind of activity and behavior that has to happen in organizations. So I think this is going to be a big one, and we've got to be the shepherds in a sense of this. We can't own this. You can't do it just as an HR program. It has to be done as a business leader. The last one I want to talk about is learning, since we are with a lot of ATD people here. And I will only take a minute on this because there's a lot to talk about in learning. The learning industry, you guys, a lot of you have been in it longer than me. I entered the learning industry when online learning was becoming big, and we were talking about e-learning, and we were all buying LMSs for e-learning. That was a big wave in about 2005 or so. And we all did that, and it kind of worked for a while, and then, YouTube came along and Google and all this other stuff, and like, whoa, people don't want to take these courses anymore. They're too long. They don't want to take even TED videos are too long. I want a 1-minute video. Why can't I find it in 30 seconds and then just move on? Getting back to the overwhelmed employee problem. So we've got this really sort of daunting problem in learning. And all the economic data proves that if we can't reskill people faster, they are going to be behind in their own careers. And so people are now coming to work saying, you know what, if I can't learn anything here, I'm not going to work here. Your learning environment is your employee engagement and your employee experience. It is a critical part of your employee experience, especially amongst young people. My daughter, who she worked for OpenTable for a while. She took this job in digital marketing. She wanted to go to this course on how to use Marketo. They were going to send her to this course. One day they said, sorry, we don't have the budget. We don't think we're going to send you this course. She comes home and she says to me, you know what, I think I'm going to quit. I don't want to work there anymore because I can't go to that course. That's the kind of, and I understand where she's coming from. Turns out they did end up sending her, and she quit anyway and went to work for another company. But that was a whole bunch of other things behind that. But that's my point. If your learning experience is bad, your employees are suffering, and they're talking about it. They're talking about it to each other. They're talking about it to their friends. It's not just about performance. It's about the experience. We also have so much incredible content available. It just amazes me. I mean, we have been through a disruptive period of learning, and we didn't even know it. Do you remember how hard it was to get courses in the early 2000s? It cost $70,000 per course hour to build e-learning in the early 2000s. Now you can get that stuff for free, taught by college professors or experts, almost free. In a whole variety of forms, and it's video and it's interactive, and you can skip around from place to place, and you can search the text to find the information you're looking for. It's an amazing difference. But we don't have platforms that bring it all together. So what's happened is, despite that, we are further behind in the learning experience than we've ever been. We're redoing the most famous research we ever did. It was called the High Impact Learning Organization. We've done it 4 times. We're doing it again. It's coming out around April or May. And the research that came back found that the Net Promoter Score of L&D by business leaders is -8. You know what the Net Promoter Score of B2B businesses in general is? Is 30. The Net Promoter Score of Apple is about 40. The Net Promoter Score of L&D is -8. That means basically people wouldn't recommend that you use the L&D function in your company. And that's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It's because the infrastructure of learning hasn't kept up. The learning management system industry hasn't kept up. I love the LMS industry. I know all these guys really, really well. They've done a great job of talent management. And now all this video and real-time learning stuff happened, and they weren't ready for it. And they didn't build you a tool that brings it all together. So there's a lot of disruption going on there. We have made this huge shift to online. This is an interesting chart because it just sort of hits home how disruptive this has been. In only 6 years or 7 years, we've gone from 70% instructor-led training to 30%. And the number of programs and the amount of time spent on video, online, virtual classroom, and apprenticeship and face-to-face learning has exploded. I think a lot of the instructor-led training, and by the way, instructor-led training is not going away. Corporate universities are not going away. In fact, the corporate university idea is actually becoming big again because companies have told us, look, we've got this great stuff online, but we need to get people together face-to-face to create the relationships and the connections and have the innovation sessions that we need to facilitate the transitions we're going through in the company. So it's been quite disruptive. I think what's happening, just to make it quick, is we're building a new layer of tools, which I call the learning experience platform, that's going to sit on top of all this stuff, that's going to bring together what's in the LMS, what's not in the LMS, what's in the video library, what's in YouTube, all these different things, and give you a new learning experience that your employees will really relate to in a very consumer-like way. So that's a big change. And it is also affecting the skills and capabilities of L&D. We have a big session going on next month, a digital learning summit. We're bringing together a bunch of big companies to talk about this. And maybe during the Q&A, if you want to talk more about it, I think it's a really exciting time to reinvent, the way we go to market with all of our L&D programs. The final point is, I just want to wrap up on this. You're going to hear a lot about the future of work. For some reason, everybody loves talking about it. And I would simply say that everything I can see about the future of work is it's playing into our hands. The future of work is not somebody buying a bunch of software and buying a bunch of robots and throwing them into the workforce. It's going to affect all the things I just mentioned earlier. It's how the organization is designed. It's how people are rewarded. It's how we retrain people. It's how engaged they feel at work and how we redesign the employee experience. It's how we redesign the customer experience around the employee experience. It's how we create continuous learning. It's how we use technology as a tool to make work better, not to make HR better, and how we use data to better understand and predict what's going on in the workforce. So this whole topic about the future of work is ultimately going to come down to us. It's going to come down to HR and L&D, and can we build the tools and the systems and the cultures and organizations to take advantage of all the technology that's coming. So let me stop there, and thank you very much again for inviting me, and I would love to welcome any questions and more discussion about any of this topic. What's our schedule? Do we have time for questions?
Here, let me see it.
We're trying to figure out how to turn the mics on.
Okay. Here's one right here. What, do you want to wait for the mics?
It's on the bottom.
Okay, bottom. It's on the bottom.
That one's not on.
Okay, great. Speak up.
So you talked a couple times about the
clicks
interactions
this way.
with teams and face-to-face.
There you go.
So if you're in an environment where there's more remote workers, more days working from home, do you have any ideas or suggestions?
Now, I don't know if it's...
How do you create teams when people are remote, people work from home? We ran our whole business like that. Bersin was all virtual for a long time. You have to physically get together every now and then. You have to take the time to get on a plane, go meet somewhere, go have dinner, have a day planning session. Use video, it helps a lot. But actually, once people know each other, virtual teams work great. But you do have to take the time and the money at least once or twice a year to get people together. It makes a huge, huge difference, especially new people entering the team.
Yes, thanks very much. That's
Sure.
a great presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to add a view. You talked a lot about HR data and digital data, etc. Do you have a view on what the impact of hacking and cybersecurity is going to be as we put more and more private data into our systems?
Well, we had a session, we have a working group of analytics people as part of our membership program, and 20 or so of them were on the phone last week, and they said the biggest thing we're hearing right now is people are worried about what we're going to do with all this data. And I think the issue is if you're building an analytics function, you need to get data security people involved, privacy, you need to do privacy policies, data governance, and very clear communication to employees why you're collecting the data and that it's for them and for their benefit and that you're not spying on them. So this is absolutely a serious topic. I haven't seen any huge things that have blown up on this issue yet, but we're now dealing with employee data that's fairly sensitive and really important. And so I think it's a policy issue. As you guys, we all have to have policies like that in place.
Hi, that was really fascinating. I may have missed it, but as you're talking and thinking about new learning and development tools, is there any chatter, thoughts about virtual reality and using that as a way of a more interactive tool?
Here's my guess on virtual reality. That's coming out of the high-low study. I don't think we're ready for it as mainstream yet. I think it's useful on some very unique, high-profile, expensive programs where you can afford to use it. We have a group in Deloitte that's used virtual reality for diversity training, where you actually experience what it's like to be a minority with other people and how it feels to be treated differently. But I don't think it's going to go mainstream for another year or two. That's my gut. We can probably get back to you with more on that when we get this research finished. Because in the high-low study, we found very, very little use of it. Far lower than I think people thought. So it might be another year or two before that gets really commercialized.
Hi, Ken Rosso from Wharton Executive Education.
Hi.
As far as you mentioned with diversity and inclusion, really getting senior managers to be the champion, how do you see, I guess, your role, and then how would you see our role in helping to promote that?
Well, I mean, it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's education. I mean, there's lots of data, and we can help you with this, that shows that this is a business performance issue, it's an employee engagement issue, and honestly, it's an issue of citizenship and fairness, which is a big topic in the public domain. And if your company is behind and that information leaks out, it's not going to look good. Somebody could tweet it. Who knows what? So I think we have to educate business leaders that it's a serious topic. I mean, I think in Silicon Valley, where I live, people are really struggling with it because they know that it's important and they can't find the candidate pool that they need, so they're really doing everything they can to reach back further and further and further into the candidate pipeline to try to build a bit more diverse workforce from the beginning. So I think it's mostly education, though. But I don't think we in HR, I don't think a CEO can turn it over to HR. We actually found, we're going to launch a diversity maturity model pretty soon. We were just working on it last week. We found that the most sophisticated companies in diversity don't put the head of diversity as the boss of diversity. They don't have a chief diversity officer leading the diversity. It's the CEO or a senior business leader leading the diversity initiative. There still may be a chief diversity officer, but that person can't do it alone.
Thank you for sharing your words of wisdom and your experience.
Sure.
Tom Gill, representing the Gabriel Institute. Excuse me. And my question is, going back to your initial study that you had mentioned, that half the people were in business. So I'm just curious to know what the other half of the people were.
The other half were HR, L&D people.
What was the
Sorry, you guys
question?
are in business too.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the mic to it.
No, the question was in the Human Capital Trends study, when I said 50% of the respondents were business people, I meant 50% of were non-HR business people as opposed to HR L&D business people. So some of the data varies by audience.
Hi, Josh, long-time listener, first-time caller. With the
I know who that is.
Thank you. Reskilled people, career environment and engagement, do those clash with the whole gig or contract jobs? And how do the two relate? If we're doing more contract things, how does that relate to the culture?
It's the same exact issue. If you have a large contract or gig workforce, they have to be engaged too. Now you have a different relationship with them, and if you train them, you may have to pay them for the time they're in training. But right now there's a little bit of a holy war going on where I live between Lyft and Uber. So every time I get in a car, I ask the driver, how do you like, your employer? And, the Lyft people claim that their drivers are happier. And they are making a huge push on the fact that we take better care of the drivers than they do. Because they want you to get in the car with a happy driver who's, doing a good job and taking care of you. So it's the same set of issues, it's just a little bit of a different look at the experience. If you have a large contract workforce, the problem we have is that in most companies, the contract workforce is administered by the purchasing department and the business people, not by HR, and you don't even know who they are, and you're rarely involved. So it's a new area, but it's coming up more and more and more, and companies are asking us, what should we do? So I think it's going to become a discipline we have to deal with in HR. How are we managing the contract gig workforce and applying the same tools and techniques to them?
Hi Josh, good morning. Karen
Hi.
Vicenta from Comcast. One thing I'd like to challenge you on is the title of this slide, because I see these as business priorities. So how can we as HR professionals really help a mind shift that these are actually imperatives for the CEO and business leaders?
I totally agree with you. Well, I don't know. I think in my case, the reason I use the words HR is because I generally am speaking to you guys. I mean, I'm really more of an HR person than a business consultant, although, I get dragged into the business conversations too. I think it's a language change. I think we have to be sensitive to some of the words we use and oftentimes do a translation. Like the word employee engagement. Do CEOs care about that? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, what they care about is retention, performance, talent pipeline. I think some of it's language. And, I would love your feedback if you think the way we're positioning it is too HR geeky, because I don't want to do that either. I completely agree with you. But I think your job and all of our jobs is to translate this into something that's meaningful to the people running the organizations, whether that be line leaders or senior executives. And if we can't do that, we're not doing our jobs. We can't, otherwise we're just the HR administration department.
Over the past, Dave Paskowski from Vertex, over the past several years, there's been a vilification and a lot of misconceptions about millennials. I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on some of the myths or truths that you've encountered.
Yeah, so the question was, there's been a vilification of millennials. Well, millennials are people too. There's none in here, I noticed. Where are they all? There's a couple. I have 2 millennials in my family. So a couple things. So Deloitte is, next week or the week after, we're going to launch the Deloitte Millennial Survey. It's huge. 70,000 people take the survey. They do find in that research that people at the younger part of their careers do have different aspirations and different priorities than people that are older. They are very easy to understand. They're the things that young people think about. They think about development. They're much more focused on culture. People that are millennials grew up in a recessionary environment. They didn't grow up when we did in the 1950s and 60s. They've seen different things early in their career. They expect businesses to be more purposeful. They expect CEOs to have more social value, to put more social value into their work. 60 or 70% of the millennials in that study that you're going to see next week say, I don't want to be a business executive like the executives in my company. They are not the role model for me. They have a much more holistic view of the business community. It's actually great. I think it's healthy. I'm learning from them. I think we all have to learn from them. They're not, you know, lazy. They're not, that's ridiculous. They're just like us. They're just trying to do what fits into the culture that they grew up in. And they're much more vocal and much more transparent, and they're not worried about putting stuff on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. It doesn't bother them. They speak up, they speak to power, they give you feedback when you don't ask for it, they expect to give you a performance appraisal when you give them one, which is fine. You know, we kind of need that. So these are all good things. Everything I read about millennials is goodness. It's kind of stuff that you read it and you're kind of like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. But because they've grown up in a different environment. I don't believe I just discount all these articles about millennials being lazy or whatever it is. Just forget that. It's not, I don't think it's true.
So my question is really about the technology. I mean, clearly the advances in technology are exciting. They're going to bring greater efficiencies to how we get things done, and in many ways contribute to a higher level of engagement of our employees. But at the same time, in my experience, there's been some downsides to it as well. Particularly when you work in a global organization, the expectation that you're accessible 24/7. What are your thoughts on how we strike that balance in helping people take advantage of the technology, but at the same time attending to their needs for balance and flexibility to meet their interests and obligations outside of work?
Well, doing technology well is very hard. I mean, it takes energy, time, focus, expertise. It is not as easy as picking a vendor and buying and implementing the software. That's a very small part of the problem. And I think what I'm seeing in big companies right now is you're going to have to create a digital technology innovation team. And you're going to have to experiment with things, and you're going to have to try pilots with employees and see what's working and what's not. The off-the-shelf tools aren't enough anymore. We're in too much of a transition right now. I mean, there are conservative companies that take technology that are very much, you know, they're late adopters that will wait and they'll implement things way later when everybody else has figured stuff out, and the employees are fine with that. But I think if you want to be on top of the technology, you've got to focus on it in a way like never before. And I think it comes down to design thinking. If you don't have a discipline around design thinking and you haven't been doing design thinking and really iterative development, it won't be easy for you to do that. So I agree with you completely. I also don't think we need so much technology. I'm a techie. I love playing around with software. We don't need all this technology. People only use 10 or 20% of the talent management software they have. So if you're going out there looking for something new, think simple. You know, buy things that do exactly what you need well and kind of discount a lot of the other stuff they show you. But I agree with you.
Question over here.
Good morning, Bruce Burwell with Bersin. Speaking or thinking further on the question about business imperatives, customer satisfaction scores, NPS are key issues that keep coming up in conversation with executives. Do you see or do you have any information about tying those directly to employee engagement, tying them directly to different HR activities, and how those two things are being connected? Because those seem to be consistent issues.
Great idea, great point. So I think we're a year or two away from that, maybe more. If you put in place an employee sensing program or employee feedback, pulse feedback program, what you would, and it worked for a year, the next question you would ask is, how do we correlate that to customer feedback? So this is going on. There's an airline, I won't mention which one, that one of the big airlines, and they have not been doing employee engagement surveys very often. They've been doing it once every year or two, and I thought that's really, you know, not good. But so they're going through a process of completely changing their culture and reinventing the way they deal with their workforce. They're putting in place pulse surveys. They're using some of this new technology. And the first thing on their mind is, we want to get the customer feedback correlated with the employee feedback. That is exactly what they're going to do. There are 2 companies focused on this right now, 2 vendors focused on this that are doing this. I would guess that most of the employee survey tools that I mentioned earlier, I showed you a couple of vendors, will probably be doing employee surveys next. I mean, customer surveys next, or they will be partnering with the companies that do customer surveys. But that's a really good idea. It's just hard to do. Actually, one of the healthcare providers, Kaiser Permanente, for example, is doing this now, where they have patient feedback kiosks in the hospitals. And I don't know how exactly that works, but you can give the nurses feedback on the experience that you're having, as a patient. And they're correlating that with the new Pulse survey stuff they're doing about employees to see how they two match up and whether one is indicative of the other and how they can figure out what the drivers are of customer engagement through employee engagement. So it's absolutely a trend. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm curious with all these other predictions, what we need to be thinking around compensation and what may need to change around that with the rest of the HR.
Yeah, great question. So what do we do about compensation and where does that fit? First of all, I'll say we're building a rewards practice in our research right now. We probably won't launch it until late in the year or next year because it's the one area we really didn't study for many years. But as far as the human capital trends this year went, we had a big effort to figure out what was going on in rewards. And so we have a bunch of data that's coming out in February on that. I would say there's a couple trends that I've picked up. One is much more transparency. There are a lot of sources for pay data now. LinkedIn, Glassdoor, PayScale, the traditional vendors doing surveys. So employees have much more bargaining power than ever before. They know what the job market is in different positions. So that's an issue. Number 2 is more flexibility. Companies are telling us they're moving more of their salary into either bonuses or flexible pools so they can have much more discretionary decisions about high performers, because my research shows, and I think most of you probably know this, that super high performers are sometimes 3, 4, 5 times more valuable to a workforce, to an employee group, a team, than the average. And if they're not able to get a raise, they'll go somewhere where they can. And the tech industry has figured that out. I mean, the tech industry will pay top engineers $1 million a year to steal them away from somebody else, which would be unheard of, in a large corporation. And then I think there's going to be more flexible, increased flexibility in the benefits that people are offered as, people, I want 3 weeks vacation instead of 2 weeks. I want, more leave, different benefits. So I think that's going to get mixed in. So we're studying that. I don't think we have the answer yet, but we're going to work on it. So keep in touch.
Focusing in on number 10 with L&D,
Mm-hmm.
struggle is real. Any ideas or approaches or things to kind of lift the fog a little bit?
Yeah, how to lift the fog on L&D. I think maybe the 2 things. Number 1, think about the digital learning environment as a tapestry of systems, not an LMS. That's number 1. Get out of LMS-centric thinking, which many of you have probably already done. Number 2, think about learning as an experience, not a program. People don't learn, I mean, you know this, you guys know this better than I do. You learn through a whole myriad of things that happen at work. Some of it's reading and coursework, some of it's a developmental assignment, some of it's a conversation. We have a thing we call the 4E model, education, experience, exposure, environment. Some of it's the materials around you, the processes around you. Think of yourself as an experience consultant, not an L&D instructional designer, and you'll get out of that box. And I think that's really the biggest change that's going on. We don't need as many formal training programs developed by ourselves as we used to. We still have some, but like at Deloitte, there are no professional L&D people teaching courses. All of the courses are taught by consultants. There are no trainers in Deloitte. There are L&D professionals building programs with consultants leading other consultants. That creates a culture of learning in Deloitte where people know that they are expected to train other people to take their roles when they leave and they move on. That's part of learning today. I would say our digital learning environment in Deloitte is not that good, actually. It's probably behind. But people make up for it in other ways. So I think it's expansive thinking. And if you read about the 4E model, that's out there on the internet, or if you remember, you can get it. That we have lots of thinking on that. And I would say those are the two biggest things. Does that help?
We have time for one last question.
Hi. You talked at the beginning of augmented work and sort of job changes. I'm just curious your thoughts on how that relates to what I see, I think many of us see as a mass of people who are underemployed, and also particularly on the blue collar people who are looking to maybe recreate a past that's not going to happen, but looking for the next thing.
Yeah, this is a big. I mean, I'm really doing everything I can to figure this out. You know, given the relationship that I have with Deloitte, it's a complicated problem, and I think the United States is going to have to come up with an industrial policy to solve this. This isn't going to be a bunch of rifle shots. This is going to be a more systemic thing. For example, many of the underemployed populations in the United States are in cities where jobs have moved to another city. And the research shows that the high-paying hybrid jobs that I talked about earlier today tend to be in big cities. And organizations are moving more and more of their knowledge work into big cities where there are universities and clusters of culture, and millennials like living in cities, and they're comfortable with cities. So that is moving jobs away from the more rural small towns. That's a huge issue. That's number one. Number two, you look at economic research on inequality. One of the things that's gone down in the last 10 years is this thing called dynamism. Dynamism is the ability for people to pick up and move to where the job is. You know, I think, in the early, parts of the United States, people picked up and moved. They moved to Pittsburgh for the steel industry. They moved to Detroit. Well, then they moved to Detroit. The jobs went away. Now they can't move out. So that's an issue. There's the issue of training and skills. There's the issue of supporting the organizations that are in different cities and encouraging them to move jobs to different locations. So I think there's a whole tapestry of things here. I don't think it's a single element problem. And what I would love to do, and if any of you work in a think tank or support the federal government, I would love to help you. We don't really have a group in Deloitte doing this. I think we need a whole industrial policy that brings these pieces together. Now that we have a new administration, better time than ever to do this, because there's a bunch of different moving parts. There's also demographics, by the way. The United States is getting older. The countries that are getting older are suffering this problem in different ways than the countries that are getting younger. So all of those things come together. So I don't think we as HR or business people can solve it alone, but in some ways I think this year we're gonna be talking about it a lot, and I think the administration is going to force us to take a much more active role. So that's the best I can give you on that one. Thank you.
So, Josh, we want to say a very big thank you on behalf of ATD and PSBS, and because you did say you want to come back, we want to give you a reminder of Philadelphia here.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Sally.